Hey, it's Noor for Adtech Unfiltered. In an era where there seems to be a tech point solution for everything, it's mission critical to build a thoughtful strategic foundation for ad campaigns before layering on technology or automation. And that may be an increasingly foreign concept for executives of tech-first campaigns today. Tash Walker, founder of global market research agency The Mix, joins me at our studio in Cannes to explore how marketers are mistaking data for insight and why chasing short-term media metrics can derail long-term brand growth. She breaks down what it takes to craft strong, human-centered strategies in a fragmented landscape. We also discuss why it's time to reconsider how much thinking we're willing to outsource to tools and tech. We'll head into this episode with Tash right now.
Tash, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Most of the people that we've spoken to today have focused on a lot of the ad tech side, but ad tech can't stand alone without us thinking meaningfully about strategy. So I've got some strategy questions for you today.
Right. Bring it on.
Where do you think modern marketing strategy most commonly breaks down?
Trying to do too many things. I think we're at a point of influx in our industry where we have a ton of new technology available. We have some economic swirl. And so I think marketers most commonly get stuck between a rock and a hard place. They focus on short-term metrics, which of course are critically important. But actually the biggest miss of all is brand building over time. And we know that increasingly brands are looking to the short-term metrics over the longer-term metrics. And so we see a real breakdown of that long-term brand building happening, which is where strategy really comes into play. So that's the biggest source of challenge right now for marketers.
What is most often overlooked when putting together a meaningful strategy?
Having a single-minded vision, which is utilizing some of the classic marketing 4Ps, fundamentally. I think we often see now that because of the influx of new technologies and metrics, which is so attractive to marketers, right? They're really affordable. You can demonstrate progress. What we are missing is some of that leadership required to commit to a big idea for several years. And so I think fundamentally for us, it's about finding those voices and making sure that those people are championed and supported to really pursue those longer term strategies, which we know prove dividends in the end. And the biggest brands in the world, the ones that are most successful, the ones that are finding the double digit growth in markets which are really quite challenged right now, have those voices and that leadership right at the top. They have a seat at the table.
Do you think that marketers confuse data with insight?
Everyone confuses data with insight. I think one of the truisms and the challenge of the world of insight right now is that insight has become really quite a loaded word, often associated with quite significant negativity. And it's fundamentally because no one knows what insight is. There's not a clear narrative around what great insight now looks like. So there's a real role today for rethinking what the role of insight is within this kind of contemporary world of marketing that we operate in. We need a clear narrative. What does great insight actually look like? We need some champions in the industry. And we also need to think about training because so many people don't know what it is, don't know how to write one, don't know how to spot one. And so the question is, if we don't train people to do that really well, how can we possibly think that insight can thrive and have a future in our industry?
Now, AdTech has become this rising star, a big piece of the advertising landscape. So with the rise of AdTech and programmatic, how do you see that really impacting the way that we analyze insight and pull insight?
Adtech is a phenomenal tool, but I think I would go back to the basics of if we don't train our marketers and our creative leaders to understand the basic principles of marketing, how to spot good insight, how to use good insight to create fundamentally great marketing strategies, overloading that with Adtech is just building jelly on jelly, right? So if we move to that before really having those fundamentals of that longer term brand building in place, then I don't think we can expect great things to come of it. I think you can see some short-term metrics coming through, which is great. But again, we see those problems where we see those brands overly relying on those short-term measures and not putting enough emphasis on those big red threads, the big ideas that we need to know are in place for the cornerstones of brand building to happen.
How have you advised marketers or advertisers when it may seem like they're too addicted to these media metrics or convenience metrics so that they can see the bigger picture?
I mean, I think the truth today is that it's all about leadership. So there are several places that we can go to find great leadership. I mean, as fundamentally as an agency, you want to work with clients who have those aspirational role models in that business that are going somewhere and taking that business somewhere where it can. And so the people in our industry who want to win a Cannes Lion are only going to do that through those people who have those strong voices, enabling the positive creativity to happen. But you can't do that by focusing only purely on those short-term measures. So I think it's about championing those voices. It's about making sure that the future talent in our industry is being trained well to have the absolute basics of marketing in place. We operate in an industry which is incredibly badly trained. And so we must focus on how to make sure that people are more educated, understand the basics and the principles, and then can use technology on top of that. And leadership skills are incredibly important. And again, one of those things that we often assume people learn on the job, which is just not the case. So leadership is everything.
How would you describe what strategic laziness looks like in today's media ecosystem?
Well, I mean, I think people use buzzwords and acronyms relentlessly. If you can't describe to your own family, to your mother, what it is that you're trying to accomplish with your marketing strategy, then I would suggest that you don't have a good strategy. And so oftentimes I think people default to industry jargon or language, utilizing metrics that they can grab hold of really easily and readily and mistake that for strategy. But actually strategy is about removing things. It's about taking things away and being able to explain to almost anyone what you're trying to accomplish and to bring people with you. So you have to have enough of that simplicity, but also the boldness and the charisma to bring people on that journey with you, to want to help you to accomplish the plan that you need to get to. Laziness is when you don't do the hard work of taking those things away. It's about subtraction, not addition.
When we live in today's world, I feel like the use of the word fragmentation is just so, it's a buzzword, it's used often, but there is a lot of truth to it at the same time. How do we put together a thoughtful strategy when we're considering so many channels that we want to reach people across?
Again, I think probably the answer that I would give that most sums this up is that red thread. If you understand deeply and know deeply what you're trying to accomplish, then the choices that you make subsequently, regardless of how much fragmentation go on, much simpler, because you have a very clear North Star as to where you're trying to go to. I think for the most part, where fragmentation becomes a real problem is because there is no clarity as to what the strategy is. And so the choices become hard immediately. You don't really know where you're trying to go to. You're hedging your bets left, right, and centre. So it comes back down to having that simplicity of that strategy on a page, everyone understands, and then you make the choices that allow you to fulfill and to accomplish that plan.
How would you advise a strategist today who feels paralyzed by all the information out there to consider when putting together a strategy?
I think most of all, for all of us in this industry, we have to have empathy for ourselves. It's tough. It's a tough time to be in business. It's a tough time, whether you're client side, agency side. I think for strategists today, it's about over-delivering on education for yourself. It's about finding as much education as you possibly can so that you absolutely understand your industry, the world that you operate in. And it's about seeking out that mentorship from those places where you don't operate so that you fully understand the commercial realities of what it is that your strategy has to deliver against. I see so many strategists who don't have good business acumen. And if you're making recommendations but don't really fully comprehend what it means to absolutely implement those kinds of strategies, then you will come across as naive. You will not get your work into the kind of great places that we operate in today, the Cannes Lion Awards, for example. You won't get there. You need to understand not only your industry, but also the industry in which you operate into as well.
How has the influx of MarTech and AdTech tools impacted the quality of strategy that strategists can put out into the world?
It's a great question. And I think one of the words that I know we've talked about is the word outsourcing. And Insight's a great example of this. 30 or 40 years ago, when the advent of the market research industry happened with the likes of Stanley Pollitt from BNP, they created something which was about useful tools for planners and advertising. And MarTech and Adtech is really just part of that progression of tools that people can use to do better work. The danger with that is that we have effectively outsourced those skills. And so the skills no longer reside within agency teams or even client teams, actually, quite often. And so actually you get a kind of drip effect happening where you're losing the intellectual capacity to be able to think through those questions because you don't even understand how to do that work yourself. So I think it's a fine balance. I think what we have to make sure is that the tools are themselves definitely useful and we're looking at them in strategic ways, but also you've got a handle as a strategist on how to do that work yourself so that you don't lose touch with the direction of travel that the technology is taking you in, and you don't lose your ability to have an opinion about how it's affecting what it is that you're trying to accomplish.
So I'll pull from what you've just said and ask this question. Beyond it being Ken at this particular moment, it's also 2025, and this big marker for 2025 is this endless mention of AI. I'm not going to ask you specifically about AI, but do you think that we have traded intuition for dashboards and other types of technologies that are doing the intuition work for us?
Yeah, I think it's really good provocation. I would suggest that we have to take a balanced viewpoint of things because we're still seeing so much advancement every single day as to what the AI technology is capable of. So as we often hear, we're only at the kind of worst point in history as to how sophisticated those tools can end up being. But I think more importantly, I think for marketers, for strategists, the ways in which we're using AI have to evolve so that we still have a seat at the table. And ultimately, if we don't have our voices in that C-suite environment, then what are we doing? All of our jobs will be taken and we'll be, maybe sitting on a beach somewhere. So I think fundamentally we have to think about what our role is in utilizing AI smartly so that we are absolutely understanding its efficiencies that can be had, but also where it can augment the value that we bring to our businesses, because otherwise it's simply a functional tool and that's not going to be the direction that it always ends up in. So how do we use it in a way that's genuinely adding value to our businesses without losing our seat at the table, I think is the provocation that people need to think through.
What are the risks of letting automation play such a big role, and how could those risks impact our capacity to capture meaningful insight?
So, huge risk. Don't know if you've heard of the Mephisto walls. It's this idea that comes from actually the universe. So if you're an astrophysicist, you'll be familiar with the Mephisto waltz. And it's the idea of two black holes coming together, and gradually they come closer and closer together and merge into one. And that is the danger of technology now, because we all are using the same technologies and the same platforms. So if, for example, you took trend reports, 90% of trend reports come from just 10 cities in the world. And we have this phenomenon going on, and you'll see it in all of the marketing press, of sameness, of everything just feeling somehow similar, even though we're employing creative people to do different things. So I think the huge risk to us all is that we're making tweaks, we are changing the dial, but really we're just shuffling deck chairs here. We're not making significant leaps in either creativity or marketing communication or innovation, for example. The future of the world needs big ideas. And so ultimately, if we're all using the same tools, I think the biggest risk is that we end up utilizing the same answer again and again, rather than really thinking through those more lateral conversations that result in the most interesting innovation happening. Bet you didn't know where Ozempic came from, for example. Ozempic came from a research study that was done in the 90s on a bearded dragon lizard. And so this was a totally random study, but what they found from that was that one of the enzymes secreted in the saliva of that particular lizard was what ultimately became Ozempic. And that was not a study that was designed to do that. And that's the example of lateral thinking that is required to come up with significant innovation. And I'd question, I think, where those future innovations are coming from if we're all using exactly the same platforms.
I'll leave it there. I think that maybe two buzzwords for 2025 are both AI and Ozempic, actually.
Yeah.
So a lot of great things to think about. And thanks so much for the time.
Pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thanks again to Tash Walker, founder of global market research agency The Mix, for her time and for unpacking the fundamentals of being strategy and insight-driven first. A quick 2 cents from me. I'm all for the smart layering of tech and ad tech, hence the existence of this podcast, but it's sometimes comical how far we remove ourselves from the fundamentals of advertising that campaigns just can't succeed without. We'll be releasing a succession of episodes from our time at Cannes in coming days. I'm Noor Naseer for Adtech Unfiltered. Stay tuned for more shortly.